Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our Careers to Entertain speaker series, where we explore different pathways in entertainment and showcase our very own Cal State LA alumni. I'm Terry Lopez, chair of the Cal State LA Cal State LA Entertainment and Arts Alumni Network, and advisory council member on the CSU Entertainment Alliance. We launched our first session last month with two of our alums, music supervisor Janet Lopez and moderator Fashion Cox. If you're interested in viewing that recording, you can visit the Entertainment and Arts Alumni Network website to request the link, which Kristiina is dropping in the chat now. All of our programming aims to benefit and enrich alumni and current students with personal and professional tools to help you succeed in the industry. A little bit about myself. I'm a CSU LA 2003 alum and currently work as Director of Inclusion and Equity at the Writers Guild of America West, where me and my team work with producers, studio and network executives, agents and managers, and writers to advance diverse representation across the industry. The Entertainment and Arts Alumni Network's mission is to foster and support our community of alumni in performing, visual, TV, film, and media arts. We want to build camaraderie among alumni and to champion lifelong involvement with Cal State LA and serve as a resource for graduates to maintain relationships, advance career goals, and support our shared passion for our respective crafts. Our alumni network has existed since 2010 and is over 1,600 members and growing. We are so excited to learn from our featured guest speakers. But before we start, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping rules. First, please be aware that this session is being recorded. During the program, feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screens. Since we are among friends, we also encourage you to say hi to your peers in the chat and drop your LinkedIn or social media handles if you are comfortable. Now, a little bit about our speakers. Carmen Cuba is an award-winning casting director based in Los Angeles. Her career began in 1999 with filmmaker Larry Clark on the films Bully and Ken Park. In 2004, she began a long-standing collaboration with Steven Soderbergh, casting his last 14 films, including the upcoming Kimmy, starring Zoe Kravitz. Her work with Ridley Scott has included The Martian, Alien Covenant, and All the Money in the World. This year, her work on the big screen includes Leo Carax's musical entitled Annette, The Matrix Resurrection by Lena Wachowski, and The Power of the Dog by Jane Campion. Features coming out in 2022 include Jordan Peele's Nope, Claire Denis's The Stars at Noon, and Justin Simeon's Haunted Mansion. Cuba expanded to television in 2012 with the HBO miniseries Behind the Candelabra, for which she won an Emmy for outstanding casting for a miniseries movie. In 2016, she also won an Emmy for outstanding casting for a drama series for Stranger Things, and was again nominated for the show in 2017. In 2020, She was nominated for an Emmy for her work on the FX limited series, Miss America. Her recent television work has included Sweet Tooth on Netflix, We Are Who We Are by Luca Guadagnino, Devs by Alex Garland, and the Peabody Award nominated David Makes Man by Terrell McCraney. Other TV highlights include Tanya Sriracho's Viva, The Nick, The Girlfriend Experience, Narcos, Sense8, and The Chai with Lena Waithe. Upcoming work on the small screen will include The Power and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Dr. Hackel, our moderator, is the chair of the Department of Television, Film, and Media Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. Dr. Hackel previously served as the director of the MFA program in TV, film, and theater, also at Cal State LA. I will now have Dr. Hackel begin the conversation.
Thank you so much, Terry. Carmen, we're so excited to have you with us today. We love all our alums, but you're a very, very special alum. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Carmen and I have never met before, but I see her every day when I go to work because we have a picture of her winning her first Emmy up on the wall. We feature our alumni, so it's great to see you live.
Oh wow! I had no idea. That's sweet.
We should get a couple more pictures of you up as well. So I was checking your IMDb the other day, and you have 115 credits. So if there's anybody who can tell us a little bit about what a casting director does, it's you. Tell us a little bit about the art and craft of casting.
Sure. I think, first of all, if anyone watching this wants to really get a deeper dive into it, there's a really amazing documentary that was made about this called Casting By, and I highly recommend it because it's not procedural at all. It just really brings it all to life. But what I can say is that what is casting? It's there's definitely a process to it. There's a beginning, middle, and end, which is what attracts me to it. You can see, you start off with a script with maybe sometimes somebody or a couple of people attached, but in general, you have to cast every single part that speaks. Casting directors do not do the parts that don't speak unless they are required to do some action that the director would be directing them for. So we start off with a script. We sort of break it down. We see what parts are important, leading roles, supporting roles, and then day players. And it's a lot of charting and organizing, which I really love. And then you get into the ideas part of it. And even before you start thinking of ideas, you have to sort of figure out how the director translates the script and these parts. And I always say that if you read in a script that someone is described as beautiful, for example, for me, it's very important to figure out what the director thinks that word means to him in this particular piece, as opposed to me going like, oh, such and such is beautiful, must be her or him. And then it's a series of sort of dealing with agents, getting ideas from them, getting ideas from my sort of history of working with actors, doing research for new ones, and then various versions of either meeting with people, auditioning people, lots of self-tapes, especially now with COVID. And also figuring out the budget, and the budget stuff sort of comes at the beginning, because you have to have an idea of the parameters that you're looking for, budget and scheduling, because you can look at a script and say, oh, it should, Margot Robbie is the best person for this part, but if she's not available and you don't have the money for her, then you shouldn't even bring her up, because then everyone's going to get excited about that idea and it won't work. And then you're making deals, and you're, working very closely with producers and line producers for that. And And you basically do all of those things simultaneously until you've cast every single part.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It's a lot, but it's finite, which I like. Like it's fluid, but it's also, there's a real logic to it. You have a breakdown of the day-to-days, the schedule for the film, and you see that these people work first, so you start casting those, and you just sort of, it's logical but also very creative, and that combination is what I think spoke to me the most, or continues to speak to me the most.
You mentioned that the pandemic had, with COVID, had really affected the casting process. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes. Not being able to see people in person, while initially was a relief, because I feel like for all of us, obviously, we'd been experiencing so much stimulus. But for me, also in these last few years, I mean, when you guys read my bio, when Terry read my bio just now, I felt so tired from all that work. But it's true that, like, all of those projects, you have to imagine I'm seeing hundreds of people per project to get to some projects actually have hundreds of people in them. So multiply that by how many I have to see to get to that. And it's a lot. So initially in the pandemic, it was like, okay, like this will all shift to self-tapes, so I could just do it at home. And there's a lot of energy exchanged in-person auditions for me. Like I always tell the story that my kids can tell when I come, my kids who are now 15 and 17, but when they were younger too, they could tell when I had a day of in-person auditions versus when I didn't, because my energy is very different, because it's a big energetic exchange with actors. They come in the room and they're being vulnerable, and I have to meet them in that place and really be supportive in that way, and it's draining. And so we did not have that, obviously, but that had its own, that was challenging. And I was doing an audition in person last night, which I've just barely started doing, but and I recognize that the challenge of doing it in person is better than the challenge of doing it in Zoom, because it really is an energetic process, and on Zoom that energy is different, and it's not for me. I don't prefer it. But at the same time, I have been doing things over self-tape and Skype for a long time, because the majority of things that I do don't shoot in LA for whatever reason. So I had been having to do all of this stuff anyway, just not in the same sort of volume. And I definitely have never, until the pandemic, cast an entire thing without having met a single human, including the director or producer team. I did Obi-Wan. I never met anyone in person. Not the director, not the producer, because they were a whole team I'd never met before. So it was just like this whole virtual crazy thing.
Under good conditions, that doesn't just involve self-tape. How do you find new actors? There are a lot of familiar actors, lots of famous actors, but how do you find new talent?
I mean, we do have a traditional process in that the things that I do are union projects. So it's usually union actors, which is not to say we don't have room for non-union actors, but the traditional process is that people have agents. And so we put out a breakdown with the description of what we're looking for. Agents receive it. I think there is a way for actors to have access to those breakdowns also, or non-represented actors. There's a thing called Actors Access that you can sign on to. And then, submissions come in. It used to be that you would get huge, piles of photos that would arrive. And that was my favorite thing, was like sitting on the floor, pulling out these pictures and like organizing them, because I am also a very tactile person. But we don't have that anymore. So now it's slightly like, a dating website where they all come up on the screen, and I just like click, and I'm like, I like him, I like her, so there's that. And but I'm always doing research. I'm always reaching out to actors that I know who work with other actors or in improv stuff. I have friends who teach acting and are, just I reach out to the community a lot, just my community. And when there's something specific that I know someone has had some sort of relationship to, then I reach out to them. And it's amazing how much how helpful they'll be in connecting.
That's nice. And you've had such a long career. How did it all start? How did you discover casting? What led you to casting?
I had no idea casting existed. I was a journalist. I was a journalism major and then was a journalist. And I can only now look back and see the thread of how I landed here. I would say a good friend of mine a few years ago said that I'm an artist and humans are my medium, because he is an artist. And we were talking about art, and I was like, well, I'm not an artist, but I facilitate. And he said, oh no, you are an artist, but it's just humans that are your medium. And I would say that's been it's been my whole life. Even before I, just growing up, I've always had a real curiosity and connection to humans and their stories and how they all fit into their worlds. Maybe because I'm of two different cultures. I'm Peruvian and American, and literally, like, my family is in Peru, my Peruvian family. So I was in two worlds. But specifically to casting, I would say, the real story is that I was in an elevator at a job that I was working at to pay the bills when I first moved here. I was a legal assistant at a law firm, and someone asked if I was interested in coming in to interview for a show that was starting. And I interviewed, and I realized I did not want to be on the show, but I asked if there's anything I could do behind the scenes. And I was still at school at night. So I was at Cal State LA at night, and I was working at this law firm by day, which I know many of your students have that same experience. And actually, I wouldn't trade that experience now at all, because I think that the way that I had to juggle all of that, including now this internship that I added onto my weekends, because they said, yes, you can intern in post-production. Because juggling all of those things is the only way I could juggle the way I do today and not feel crazy. It just feels productive. And you obviously have to be very organized and have people around you, like my support team. If they weren't as organized as I am, if not better, I would not be able to function at the level that I function. But so I started in post-production, which was not that big of a leap for me, because I was a news reporter. I was a field reporter, which meant that I was, out in the field, picking the people to tell the story of whatever happened that night, interviewing them, going back, editing my story together myself which back then was not as easy as it is now. And so I had done, full packages for 2 years. And so I went into post-production, and I learned how a TV show like that was made. And then they wondered if I would be interested in casting, because they pointed out that what I had been doing as a field reporter was very much in line with the documentary casting that they were hoping to do. And I said yes. And from there, I worked within that world of MTV and the real world, and I did pilots for them. It was a young person's game at that. I mean, I think it still is. It's a like great place for people to go and learn. But I had gotten to a point where I was at the I had sort of done everything there, and also it was like, oh wait, so this seems like this is my career. But the shows were turning into reality TV, and I was a more documentary based person, and they didn't have the word for it as reality TV, but it wasn't appealing to me. So I interviewed at a few places to sort of move on, but it turns out that they were Big Brother, Survivor, and The Bachelor. And so in those interviews, I was like, wait, this is exactly what I was afraid of. And no, this isn't for me either. And I had a friend who worked with me who's still one of my closest friends, who worked with me at Real World, who said, I know a casting director in feature films. Do you want to just try that? So I met with her. She did not want to hire me because I had now been the head of a department for a few years, and coming in, back then it was just a casting director and a casting assistant. Here now we have three. We have an associate and an assistant per job, but she just thought I would be, I don't know. I'm very close with her still too, but she was not interested in hiring me. And eventually she hired me. And then I worked for her for a while. I mean, I did great projects with her. If that introduction had not been sort of Terry Gilliam and Frank Oz and Eddie Murphy and, Johnny Depp, I don't know that I would have pursued it, but I stayed in it for a while. And then my grandmother got sick and I went to take care of her. And I decided while I was taking care of her that none of this was for me, that it all seemed very frivolous and not the way that I'd imagined using my brain. And so I actually applied to grad school for journalism, and I thought I would go back and do that. And I think I've answered now. I've gone beyond your question, but that's how but then she convinced me. I applied everywhere. I got in. I was about to decide what to do. And that my mentor, my boss at the time, took me aside and said, hey, you're really good at this. I think you've got a shot. When you get out of, journalism school, what are you going to do? And she said, if you stay with me and work the 2 years that you would have done in grad school, I'll make it the grad school of journalism, of casting for you. So I did. And she was right.
I'm going to underline for our students who are watching today how an internship in journalism led to amazing career success. Just saying, students.
Yes, absolutely.
And they know, and I think especially your experience of, the full-time job, and the internship, you had no time to do any, you're taking classes at night. That is our students. That is their circumstance. And it's just great to see how it can lead to opportunities and such great success.
Yeah, no, it really prepared me. And I think that experience that at least the Cal State LA offered me was huge, because I could have gone on. Nobody at any point really asked me if I had a degree, but so I could have, because I transferred from University of New Mexico. So when I moved to LA, so I could have gone on without that degree, but it was very important to me to have. And the opportunity that I had to do it at night was huge. And it wasn't just sort of ticking off these classes. I had very excellent experiences there that shaped me to be able to enter into this business in a way that I wouldn't have without them. So I am very grateful to the school.
It's really lovely. Let's talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion. You mentioned that you sort of had a foot in both worlds. How do you feel that your gender or your ethnicity, how did it help your success? How did it hinder your success?
I think that when I was coming up, first of all, being bicultural was still sort of unusual. For my own identity, it was I juggled both worlds. You know, there's the idea of code switching and everything, and but it was pretty fluid for me. I think that I probably I think I'm the beneficiary of exotic privilege in the case that nobody really knows what I am. So I can't really be put into a box. And I think that that was something that worked in my favor. It didn't work against me. But I think in doing my work, it's all positive because I do exist sort of as an infiltrator because nobody can tell what I am, and I've been able to. That was actually part of why I stayed in the why I reconsidered and went back, was that I saw the ability that I have to change the simplest sort of ideas because of just who I am and how I presented it, and because it seemed natural to me, because the way I grew up was in a very multicultural and also like socioeconomically diverse life. I could now reflect that in film and TV in a pretty easy way. So I think it has worked in my favor for the most part.
I read a lot of articles about how one from Lena Waithe, who said that you were basically her co-writer on the show, and how you are able to sort of help rewrite stories and include more stories than otherwise would have been included.
Yeah, I feel I also am very privileged in that the people I work with always, even before it was sort of, you know, more popular, or more, not even popular, because that's not the right way to say it, but more on the forefront of the dominant culture's sort of mind. I have always worked with people who have heard me and seen me. And so when I've had an idea that they didn't have, they have welcomed it. I have not been sort of met with opposition to any of my ideas that with regard to diversity and inclusion, I have to say.
That's great. That's great. What's a show that you would say, of all the shows you've worked on, what's the show you're proudest of, and why?
I can't really, I saw that you were going to ask that question. I can't really, you know, it's interesting. The projects that I work on, for me, always seem to reflect what I'm experiencing at the time, or what I'm exploring as a person. And I often wonder if it's just that my connecting to the script or to the filmmaker or the creators is just the thing that tells me, like, oh, this is what I'm thinking too. But it really is true. So it just sort of depends. I would say that the Stranger Things experience to me was really, really lovely, because the filmmakers were young twin brothers who just wrote this thing on their own because they couldn't get a project on their own, and nobody thought it was going to be anything. And that part isn't even the exciting, the part that I connect to the most about that project. It's just that we just made this thing and we had these ideas, and the kids were the same age as my kids at the time. So I really connected to that, and I really connected to telling the story of these kids and to humans connecting to each other. It was a very joyful process, and I you know, it allowed me the opportunity to study my kids in a different way, which is sort of, I'm always looking at my work through my own life, and it made me really, I mean, I'd always known they were kind of weirdos in the best way. They're like the kids in Stranger Things in my head, you know. So I was able to use that and really sort of observe them in order to find the kids because I wanted the kids to reflect the weirdo-ness of mine, and it definitely helped me in my casting. but you know, I mean, I'm super excited about Obi-Wan that's coming out, because I also there was able to just do, they were super open to to what I thought would be unusual ideas for a big franchise like that and a big world. And so, you know, we have Maya Erskine in there from Pen 15, you know, it's things like that where I just was like, wow, I can be seen in a place like that I would not have imagined. And my ideas can have space there. So yeah. But also like Sense8 and this, all my work with Soderbergh, they all are meaningful to me in different ways, because they also came at different times in my life and they did different things for me. Doing The Martian was really incredible because I never imagined working with someone like Ridley Scott, and there I was. So yeah, I feel very fortunate. My experience is very wide and deep.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask this question for the students because I'm sure they're curious. What does it feel like to win an Emmy? What does that feel like?
It's so I've won 2 Emmys. The first experience was very surreal. It is one of those experiences that you don't know. You can sort of imagine like, oh, it must feel like this and this must happen to you. And sort of none of that was true. I will say, so the first one I won was for Behind the Candelabra. And what was unmatched about that experience is that every single person on that show, on that movie, was nominated, and those are people that I've collaborated with for 20 years. So we were all sitting together, all dressed up, each person sort of, I think I was the first. I think my award was the first in our category. So it just was like exciting, each person going up, and it really felt like what working on a film or a TV feels like, which is super collaborative. Like we could not have made, that movie would not have been the quality that it was if we hadn't all been at that level together and helping each other. So that was amazing. But then they call your name and you're just, it's crazy, and you're sort of walking down this aisle and you see people, you know, Molly Shannon is a friend of mine, and I hadn't even seen her. I didn't even know if she was going to the Emmy. I don't even know why maybe she was nominated that year too, but I'm like going down the aisle, and she turns around and is like, Carmen, and like it's like a movie, you know, you just sort of see her and you're like, oh my God, it's Molly, hi. And then you're walking up, you know, it's very surreal. The second one I think was, one of my best friends was also nominated. She's a casting director, Nina Gold. And so that was really great. And she took one of my sons as her date, and I took my other son. But we were sat separately. And did she win too? I think she might have also won. But so that was great, and that like I could do it with a friend. But then it's, you know, I feel like it gets more stressful in the sense of like it's, I don't know, it's if you're gonna win or not, and like that feeling, and then if you've won, I think you feel like, how do you prepare yourself for not winning? You know, it's all weird. The whole thing's weird, but it is nice because you are mostly with, it's surprising how many people, you know, it is sort of like, they call it nerd prom. And it sort of is. It's like you see a lot of people that you've worked with over the years and who you admire, and it can be a connective situation, I think.
It sounds nice. It sounds like a little bit like a reunion.
Yeah, it is. Probably, yeah.
So for any of our students or others who want to work in casting, what should they be doing now while they're in school, and what should they do when they graduate? How can they prepare themselves?
It's interesting because I think about that. When my boss at the time sort of said she'd make it grad school of casting for me, she gave me a list of movies to watch, you know, sort of the top 100 films I feel like it was like Scorsese's list or something. And so familiarizing yourself with film history, I think, is important, because you get a sense of like sort of archetypes and um and how actors are used and all of that. I guess now it's TV too. You know, in when I was starting out, TV was not the thing to pay attention to, but obviously there's so much content. And I think probably looking at the relationship between what an actor needs to do in a TV show versus movies, because that's always a thing. You know, I can look at an actor, if I'm doing a series and I look at an actor who needs to carry out a performance over, even if it's just a limited series of 8 hours, that's very different than having to do it in an indie for, 1 hour and 20 minutes. So just sort of understanding the relationship, I think that's something that people could be doing. And then when you graduate, there are programs, I think, through the academy, through the TV academy, and through the film academy, where you can intern. And the Casting Society of America has a program where they train assistants. It's tricky because there is no really entry level job in casting. You just like assist. It's the casting director, casting associate, and casting assistant. But when you come in as an assistant, you kind of have to know the process, because there's only 2 of you in the staff. So these programs where you intern and where they sort of put you through the program, I think, are really important.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
We have some questions in the chat, which
Okay.
I'm gonna share with you. One of our guests asked, "What's the difference between an associate casting director and an assistant casting director?"
I would say, I wish my team was on here to answer. They're so good. I mean, associate casting directors they're just more experienced. They do a lot of the deal making on the smaller parts. They interact a lot with the studios and with the ads and scheduling, and they're really sort of the brain. I get to sort of dream up ideas, and they sort of put them into action, and then the assistants support them along the way. They make charts and track schedules, and obviously deal with phones. And a lot of what we do is this is important. Actually, one of my kids who's thinking about colleges for next year, we've been talking about how important writing is. And I would say everyone in my office is a really good writer. And that is very helpful with communicating with agents who are always, and producers. It is a big communication career, because you're trying to communicate your ideas in a way that everyone says yes. And so, yeah, or they say yes, or they give you information that they're trying to keep close. It is always a negotiation of all that, but that's basically it. It's like the assistant supports the associate supports me.
Every faculty watching this is thanking you for saying how important writing and communication is right now.
It's really true. That was the thing I was saying that my kids were talking about that. No matter what job you're in, if you can communicate, especially by writing, but also obviously speaking, you definitely have a leg up. Because I've worked with people whose emails and things I've had to refine to show, in order to get the result that I know we can get if you just sort of shift a few words.
All right, we have a lot of questions about casting and a little
Right.
bit about from actors
Uh-huh.
on the Zoom. One asked, do you think casting will stay remote in terms of self-tape after the pandemic, or do you think that there'll be more of a return to traditional casting?
I think there'll be a return. I think we understand that what happens in a room, that, like I mentioned, that energetic exchange, you can't skip that. You just, I don't think. But I'm also curious about how this group of projects that were made during the pandemic, how they're going to feel. And it could be that people look at them and say, oh, they feel the same, so we don't have to go back to in person, And there was a point in the pandemic that I felt like, oh wow, this is amazing, we can just never see people. And because you can do it faster in theory, but then I came back around to that it's a big loss if we don't. So I think people are looking to get back in person.
There have been a lot of stages of the pandemic for sure.
Yes, exactly.
Another guest asked, what's a misconception about casting that people tend to get wrong?
That we're in charge of the rules. Sorry, my thing is just doing something. That, yeah, casting gets blamed when, especially in the diversity conversation, it's like the casting person is in charge, is what the sort of narrative becomes when the makeup of the cast looks a certain way. And the truth is, even again, before it became a real dominant conversation, my experience with casting directors, all of them, even if they themselves are from the dominant culture, they've always tried to expand what these shows and movies look like. Always, just because it's also more interesting casting it. It's like if you're doing just one sort of tapestry, one fabric, one design in your tapestry, like it's harder actually.
Another question, besides someone fitting the part, what's the number one quality you look for when you're casting someone?
Well, the thing to know is that there is no perfect person for the part on paper, because the perfect person is the perfect person for how, well, first of all, for the director, but also for the project, which means if we have, it's sort of the same thing I was saying about someone being good in this part if it was an indie film versus if someone has to, or also like if there's a very short amount of time to shoot something, then someone who can do work in a short period of time is better. If there's more time, then someone who doesn't need to like get it right on the first take but is amazing on the fifth take, then you consider them for that. There's so many factors, and there's so many factors that people just are not aware of, and you can't even know because it's not even something we can talk about publicly. I can't say, agents constantly call and ask, well, why didn't he get the part? And there's so many intangibles that go into it that I think the thing actors just have to focus on is doing their best version of it, and then letting it go and trusting that the thing that is meant for them will happen.
Great. This is a great question. If you could have a conversation with your past self, what would you tell them, your past self, before starting a career as a casting director? Is there anything you wished you knew beforehand?
No, I'm glad I didn't know anything beforehand, actually, because the discovery of it, which still continues. I literally just texted, and he's writing back as we're talking. One of my best friends, I texted him that I think I might be confused as to what acting is in 2022. So now I'm doing this exploration with myself of like, is my idea of what acting is still the same? Is it Benedict Cumberbatch in Power of the Dog, or is it Zendaya in Euphoria? Are they the same thing? It's sort of like, it is for me an ongoing conversation, an ongoing relationship to the art, to myself. So yeah, I'm glad I didn't know anything. The thing I try to impart on my children is that what I do find consistent in my career is my instinct, and being able to tap into like, this feels good to me, this speaks to me. Again, that's a privilege, because as you're coming up, you're sort of, you're just doing what you can. But I will say that a secret to my own journey is that I never stopped doing the documentary stuff in my first 10 years. So the documentary stuff is actually what paid my bills. And I mean, I got paid for my other work, but if I had only done my scripted stuff, I don't think I would have had to have a second job, or taken movies that I wouldn't have wanted to do, which like my career is pretty curated, I would say, but that is because again, in the juggling of all these things, I always I would do searches. Bravo would hire me to do a search. Like, they'd give me a chunk of money and say, go to San Francisco and find us a story there. Find us a show there. By the way, I was terrible at it because I was always like finding documentary stuff and they were looking for reality stuff. But I would go and I would interview just everyone in San Francisco. I would sort of follow the trail to interesting people. And so I did that while I was waiting for projects that I was interested in. So I guess the moral of that is maybe finding, something that you can do that you also love. And I would say I still do it. I'm doing a documentary on Michael J. Fox right now, and I'm like finding Michael J. Fox at different ages. So to me, all this stuff really blends, and I love it. And I realized a few years ago that I do still think of myself as a journalist when I'm doing this work. I'm still sort of finding the right voices to tell the stories. And I feel very lucky about that.
As an artist, is the documentary, is that how you sort of refill there's a question about refilling your artistic well, which is a lovely expression.
Yes.
Is that what helps invigorate you and keep you fresh and keep you engaged?
No, not that specifically. It is the range of the projects that I'm involved in. I really try not to not to repeat myself, but just to not be in the same space all the time. So I've been very lucky in that, I'm doing right now, this is my board that has everything on it. Right now I'm doing I'm finding young Madonna for Madonna's movie. I'm doing Magic Mike, the musical. I'm doing other things I can't talk about, I guess, but they're all but things are very different. I have half hours, I have features, I have a French film, I have a Spanish film, I have a slasher movie that one of the young cast of Stranger Things is written and directing, so I stay very diverse in my group of things that I work on. So I generally am very excited about all of them. It's more that it's like that level of excitement and stimulation is actually the stuff that I could use. I could pull back a little in that sort of arena and catch my breath. But I'm never at a loss for being inspired, honestly. I should knock on wood, I haven't been yet.
There's a suggestion that maybe you should consider writing a book about your amazing journey. So there's a project for the future.
Well, my fantasy is to go back to school for just writing. I don't know if a book about my life would be that interesting, but I definitely do. I am in love with autobiographical fiction. So there's something to be said there.
There you go. We have a couple more acting questions.
Okay.
In the eyes of a casting director, how can an aspiring actor be discovered and stand out?
I think the idea of discovering or of a discovery is not what we've sort of been told it is. I think that when someone is discovered, they've been there for a really long time, working really hard. You know, the process is long to even just to get an agent. People are here for 10 years without getting an agent. So I think it has to be about continuing to stay engaged. I always say actors should, even after they get their degrees, if they get degrees, or their big shot, their first show or movie, I really believe that actors should keep stay in a class with other actors and just keep engaging in that space where they're practicing and they're having to be spontaneous. I would say they should. Now it's so much easier to get together with a group of friends and make stuff. It used to be harder when I started out. There's content, you know, you could put content up on Instagram, you can put it up on TikTok and Twitter and all those places. And I think it's more about keeping yourself engaged and following your path and your interest rather than, I mean, it's easy to say, but you know, rather than looking at the result of being discovered, because I think people, you feel that authenticity through that kind of expression, and it does lead you somewhere.
There's a heartfelt plea for actors without representation that if there's they want to have more access to your breakdowns. So if there's
That would be actors access, I think. Yeah.
Oh, they say that there aren't enough. More.
Oh, okay. Well, the other thing, if you're in LA, the weird thing about my work is that I don't work that much in LA. My things don't shoot in LA very much. So the sort of actor starting out, I'm not really casting those parts from LA. Like if I was an actor starting out, I would move to Atlanta because everything is shooting there and we cast everything, we cast all the small parts locally.
Great.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of work in LA, it's just not mine. So I don't, yeah.
Okay, move to Atlanta.
Move to Atlanta.
After students completing your degree.
Yes, exactly.
I think we're reaching towards the end of our question time. Any final advice for our students and other professionals on this call, actors, students?
I think it's funny because I didn't expect us to, the thread of my multitasking to be such a big part of this conversation, but I feel like that is a big thing to just maintain in one's life, is your ability to be in different places, that, you know, your head, your experience. You know, for me, working at the law firm was unbelievable. The things I learned, that was a group of people I would never have worked with. And I learned so much about a different kind of pursuit. I knew I was never going to do that, but that was important to me. And then having to like drive downtown and go to school at night, and the weekend, you know, internship with a whole another group of people, again, who are all very pivotal. The people, I will say that all the people from my beginning here in LA are, I have very important people in my life still from those moments, and they really offshoot of them. You can see them throughout my career, actually. So I would say just being proactive and finding your way into places and trying. I was thinking about this when I saw it on the list of questions. if you want to be in TV and film, or if you want to be in casting, I do think it's very important to have experience in all aspects of production. I was a production coordinator. I was in post-production. Like, to understand the scope of what it takes to make a movie makes you a better casting director, because you understand what, when you look at a scene and you see where it's shot, you can visualize what's going to be required of that actor in a different way than if you're just reading it or you've just seen it on TV. You see, like, oh, it's exterior in the Arctic, and it's sort of like all of these things, how do they add up? And yeah, I wouldn't study casting to be in casting. I would study people, and in just sort of the same way as actors. It's like actors should continue having experiences in all, but like authentic experiences, not like I'm gonna go sit at a coffee shop, although that's good too. But you know what I mean? Like, I think you should continue to have the curiosity that you have when you're in college, and now just not for a grade or a degree.
I love that. That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carmen, and thank you, Dr. Hackel. This was an amazing conversation. We've learned so much. Friends, it's been a pleasure to co-host you on behalf of the Entertainment and Arts Alumni Network and the CSU Entertainment Alliance. As proud Cal State LA graduates, volunteers, and professionals, we want to take a moment to let you know we are always looking for volunteers who would be interested in being our next keynote panelist or an entertainment guru. We hope you enjoyed yourselves and are logging off with some valuable takeaways. As a reminder, you will receive a link to the recording in a few days. And please be sure to let us know how we did by taking our brief survey, which Kristiina is throwing in the chat. Have a great weekend. Take care. And once again, Carmen and Kristiina, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
My honor.